Good morning, or at least it is here in Hawaii, and welcome to part of our summer series, Dog Lovers Live. I'm James Jacobson from Dog Podcast Network, and we are coming to you live from Maui, Hawaii, and Saskatchewan, Canada. I believe this is the first live Saskatchewan guest we've ever had on anything on Dog Podcast Network. So we are speaking with Billie Groom, who, as you will discover, is a different kind of dog trainer and personality. Billie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this. Thanks, James. Glad to be here.
So, you and I have spoken in the past, and would you say that's fair that you are a different kind of dog trainer?
Yes, I've been called industry disruptor. I've been called all sorts of things. Yeah, I guess I'm different partly for my learning journey is
Yeah.
different how I started 34 years ago and developed into what I do, and as well my methodology is unconventional.
So, in a
Um,
nutshell, how do you describe your methodology? And it's called Upward Dogology, which we'll have to
right.
break down. But what is your methodology?
That's a good question. Upward, I'll start just by saying is an acronym for urban people with adopted and rescued dogs. But the adopted could also be adolescent,
Mhm.
rambunctious, but the key word being dogs. So it's over 6 months of age. So upward dogology, it is an actual methodology. It's a formula, and it adheres to the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. So conventional techniques adhere to the principles of conditioning methodologies. So both are scientifically proven and both are part of mainstream psychology and child rearing. So my methodology just has a different approach.
And so, what we are doing in this summer series at Dog Lovers Live is introducing people who have amazing dog related content to different shows. And you have a podcast and a YouTube channel, right?
No, I have a podcast and a book. I haven't done YouTube yet, but I am just so busy. But
It's the
I
next step.
yes.
So, which
Yeah.
came first, the podcast or the book?
The book. The book
Okay.
came first, and it's actually going through a second edition right now. It won an award, and it's got some really good feedback. And I also am adding a little bit more about CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, in it. Um, so I'm switching a few things in it. So it's going through a second edition. It was intended to introduce me and to spread awareness, and that is what the podcast does as well. Just because it's the first step in learning cognitive behavioral therapy for dogs is to just change that mindset from the conditioning mentality and understand that the differences. One isn't better or worse than the other, but to understand the differences. And then people
The
can also,
differences between,
the two methodologies, conditioning, which is your conventional operant conditioning, counter conditioning, classical conditioning.
and
And
that's how what most dog training is about.
right. And
Okay.
then you have cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a different approach. So, to put it in a little bit of a nutshell, conditioning methodologies, not just even in dog training, but just in general, they use reinforcements to
Mhm.
encourage wanted behavior and to discourage unwanted behavior. How the individual trainer or psychologist or parent does that is their own. But that is they change behavior using reinforcements. Cognitive behavioral therapy uses skill sets to change perception, to change behavior.
Okay, let's dig into that. When you say skill sets, an example of a skill set is define that.
So skill sets are, as opposed to a reinforcement, is a tangible, usually tangible. It could be a pat or a praise or a treat or a toy. And that's what's transferred as they go through. So they're using a reinforcement to encourage behavior. Cognitive behavioral therapy develops platform skills, which are different for every dog and every situation. You'll see a lot in nutritionists do the same thing, right? So they'll start with platform where they get the people to maybe change the eating habit change their exercise habits to a certain extent and see the changes and see what happens. Those might be fairly across the board for everybody. But if you were to ask that nutritionist, give me an example, they might say, well, apples are better than potato chips. It doesn't really tell you anything.
But
It's
you call that
more
a platform.
how,
You call that a platform.
yeah. And then it's more the changes that you see, what happens when you apply these, and then you take these and you continue to apply them. So it's the skill set, which is commonly command-based exercises, which are taught differently than puppies. They change perception and then you move them along. So the platform of cognitive behavioral therapy relies on application, which is really funny. So
that's where it starts to feel like traditional dog training.
No, I would say no to that.
Okay. How is it funny?
It's funny because it really takes the change of the mindset, because I used to really struggle with people very stuck in the conditioning. So they'll ask me questions that are correlative to conditioning methods, such as, well, you have to use a reinforcement. What reinforcement would you use? Or you have to use reward. What reward would you use? Or what's your platform skill? Like what you just asked. Mm-hmm. And when you're working under the cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'll just say as CBT from now on, if I remember to do that, I'll just say CBT because it's shorter. When you're working under that umbrella, there's a lot of those questions you can't answer simply because it's not the way the platform works. So you really need to start at the beginning when you learn cognitive behavioral therapy and work your way through. And that's what the podcast, to get back to the answer, that's what the podcast is doing a lot, is teaching people the difference between the two. And then they can decide, do I need that? Don't I? Or that's why that method, that's really good. And my trainer was really good. And I've heard this method is good. That's why it's not working with my dog. Right. So they can understand. So the podcast isn't a training podcast. It's an awareness, change the mindset, and introduce cognitive behavioral therapy and talk about the different methods and how they're different and why you would use it. So I only work with dogs over the age of 6 months.
Right. And I do want to get into the 6-month thing because it's obviously many dog trainers are like, the younger you start, the better. And we'll get to why you do younger, because we'll get to why you start at 6 months. But I'm really curious about this mindset change that is, I guess, difficult to grok for most dog people. How did you come across it? How did you develop this CBT?
Well, I started 34 years ago, and I was rescuing dogs and taking in dogs, and I had.
And you were using traditional methods at that point.
No.
You've always had your own unique.
I wasn't really interested in dog training. I wasn't. Yeah. I never intended to be a dog trainer or a behaviorist. It just evolved because I learned this methodology. I wanted to I just love dogs and just wanted to have dogs around me. And I actually didn't even grow up with dogs. I just started to take in ones from the local shelter. And as I brought in more dogs, I learned about them. I was in the States on 24 acres and I started to take in dogs without even researching. And I just worked with them on my own and learned the way I worked with them. It was later that I discovered it was different than common techniques. And when I got back to Toronto, I opened up a daycare and boarding, which was long before internet and long before they were trendy professions. I don't know if trendy is a good word. They're popular professions.
They're very popular and they're increasingly popular these days.
And they're really good for learning about dogs. Mm-hmm. So I learned I only had dogs over 6 months for that business as well, which just flew. And what I really learned was that people struggled in that adolescent stage and that rescue organizations were getting in these dogs and they were struggling with them, and dogs with checkered pasts, dogs with an unconventional upbringing, they were struggling with. And so I sold that business to focus more on those dogs and just having an entrepreneurial mindset, as my brain works. I saw a problem and I wanted to find a solution. I didn't even realize it was different until years later when positive reinforcement training really hit the scene along with Cesar Millan.
Hmm.
And that's when I started to realize the way I work with dogs was really different. And my clients were telling me now I have hundreds of clients a year
Hmm.
because I also do Zoom and do distant clients as well. So they're very knowledgeable, and I have veterinarians for clients and psychologists and people who study CBT. And then you recognize what I'm doing is different. So over a 34-year period, I've started out learning from the dogs and then learned what I knew from studying what I was doing. It's a little bit backwards of a journey.
So you were just doing it, and then you said, "Hey, let's reverse engineer this and codify this into what you call CBT or CBT or upward dogology."
Well, I call it upward dogology, but it is CBT because
Mhm.
it adheres to the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. So what I did was study that and talk
Human
to.
cognitive behavior therapy. So,
Yes, which is what positive reinforcement training and balance training, they adhere to conditioning methods, which are also for humans as well. S-
and did you pick this up, through books, or where did you gather this knowledge?
Talking to veterinarians, talking to psychologists, books. Uh, um, James C. Haw wrote a book, and he is at the University of Washington. Well, he was
Hmm.
animal scientist, and he wrote a book, Dog Behavior, Our Canine Companions. And I read a lot of that. Actually, it was a professor who introduced me to the book and said, "You should read this because everything in his book validates what you do and talks about, it explains what you do." And it was exactly right. And then more recently, of course, we have canine enrichment and canine cognition, which is great because those exercises and what they're doing and the studies that they're doing. And I talk about these on my podcast as well. I'll use them as examples to say this is a dog that's using cognitive skills. And in order to address those behaviors, we need to harness the cognitive skills. And we harness the cognitive skills, we get that side of the brain ticking and we use it to change perception. So, what I figured out is how to do that. And that's what upward dogology does.
So you're focusing on the fact that the dogs are thinking. If you were to try to connect the intellectual level of the dogs that you work with to a human being, could you do that?
Oh, I don't know if I'm qualified to do that. I don't study humans very
Well, would
often.
you say it's like a 3-year-old or a
Oh,
16-year-old or something
right.
like that in
Yeah, I
terms
do
of?
talk about that in my book, actually. And I do have the disclaimer, that I'm not a child psychologist. But yes, you can have children that are 3 years old versus children that are 4. So at 3 years old, you're teaching right from wrong, and you're instilling good behaviors, and they do think cognitively. So do puppies. They do have
Mhm.
the ability to think cognitively. What you're doing is you're teaching right from wrong and socializing. So with children, you're doing that as well, getting them out. I don't know if they call it socialization with children, but with puppies, we do.
Mhm.
And so you are stimulating cognitive skills, but it's commonly in a way that's beneficial. So they learn, ooh, they get a reward when they pee outside, and maybe a no or whatever the person does when they pee inside. So they can
Mhm.
work that out, and it works in their favor. When the child gets about 4, same as a dog, in that adolescent stage, they start to question, do I want to do that? Do I not want to do that? What's in it for me? What would
Okay.
happen if I didn't do it? That's when you know you would want to start switching over to cognitive behavioral therapy. Another way you would know is So for example, if your dog got into the garbage, if your dog doesn't know it's wrong to get into the garbage and just didn't even know, and you come home and he's just standing there happy as can be, he doesn't even know that he did anything, you would use a conditioning, just regular conditioning methods would address that.
Mhm.
If your dog knows it's wrong, he was doing it because you gypped him on his walk, he's
Mhm.
using a lot of cognitive skills there. He
Mhm.
knows right from wrong. He knows you don't want him to do that. He knows how to push the lever on the garbage pail because he's seen you do it with his foot, so he did it with his paw. He remembers that you put the chicken wings in the garbage, and he knows it's going to piss you off. So those are a lot of cognitive skills going on. So if the reason for getting into the garbage is more along those lines, you'd want to use cognitive behavioral therapy. So the
What would you
behavior is
what
technically the same.
what would you do in that case using cognitive behavioral therapy with the very clever dog that was teed off that you left and didn't do whatever he wanted to do and used his paw to open up the lever and got into the trash? You come home, you see this. What do you do using CBT?
Right. So that's a really interesting point. That gets back to people with the conditioning methods always, what do I do when my dog does X behavior?
Mhm.
Cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't work off that platform. We just wouldn't even worry about what to do when you come home. Conditioning methods, depending on the trainer and how the trainer applies it, they could
Well,
come up with something that is a negative response or a positive correction. But cognitive behavioral therapy, you're changing the dog's perception of your ability to manage a situation so that we wouldn't even actually work at all in that specific time. This is when I was talking about changing the mindset.
the platform.
So,
I'm trying. So
yeah,
I'm gonna keep pushing because I really want
but
us
I'm
in
not going to
all.
do a training because you would have to start and go all the way through. And this is
Okay.
something that other people who are stuck in the conditioning methods too,
Yeah.
they can have a hard time with creativity and application, and it depends. And that's to me the
No, I'm good.
greatest
I'm good
thing.
with the it depends, but you come home and there's a mess on the floor. Do you just leave it or clean it up yourself, or do you
Doesn't
ignore it?
matter. It makes no difference in the cognitive behavioral therapy. That is just not even. We would start working with the dog outside of that situation.
Okay, so you would like bygones be bygones. I would assume you clean it up. You don't want
Proactive
trash on your
prevention.
floor. Um,
Proactive prevention is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's proactive prevention, so that the next time that let's say the dog did that because you changed the walking schedule.
mhm.
So you came home, and normally you would take him for a big huge walk and then stay home, but you came home and you were going out that evening. So what we would do is establish skills and establish abilities, change the dog's perception, and allow you to be able to leave next time and know how to do that and change your schedule so that the dog doesn't do the behavior. So they would start at the beginning of the program and work their way through. They would learn the skills and how to apply it. So the next time they come home and they have to jip the walk, that dog doesn't get into the garbage. So
Because the
that's
dog has learned that
learned
behavior
that
doesn't get rewarded either way. You've
it's not
shifted
about the
something.
behavior, it's the perception. And
The
that's the
person.
huge mindset change, right? So back to the beginning where
Yeah.
conditioning methods focus on teaching right from wrong behavior, which is why they're
Mhm.
so good with puppies.
Mhm.
Whereas we change perception, provide options, and allow the dog to choose to not do that behavior. So it now we're getting into the stage with
Right.
kids, right? Where we want them to choose on their own to come home at curfew time, or to choose on their own to help out with yard
To do the
chores.
right. We're helping them. We're empowering them to make the right choices.
And we're providing them with skills that allow them to do that. And if they don't, if it just doesn't work, we
Right.
go back and we build more of the skills and we bridge the gap between the unwanted behavior and the level that we're at. So again, you could go back to a nutritionist and you've got your platform eating or your platform skills. So that's another thing with cognitive behavioral therapy is you do have to have skills in the platform. What those skills are depends on the dog, depends on the client, depends on what the goals are. There's a lot of different factors, but they learn themselves how to build those and how to advance them and how to apply them. So my clients actually learn how to work with their own dog. They don't learn how to work with everybody's dog. They don't learn how to fix every problem. But with their dog, they do. And it's a beautiful thing because you can see it click in their mind and you can see it click in the dog's mind. It's a beautiful thing.
Is this something that is best? Is this something that one could do by themselves, or do they really need someone like you to teach them this?
I think a lot of people do it naturally. I think a lot of people do conditioning techniques naturally. I think a lot of trainers that are using other methods are hitting the cognitive side of the brain,
Mhm.
especially canine enrichment, dog cognition studies, and agility or scent detection. They're catching that cognitive side of the brain, but to apply it to rehab. So that's why I'm not necessarily an expert in dog cognition, but cognitive behavioral therapy, how to apply dog cognition to address specific behaviors,
Mhm.
especially ones associated with aggression and anxiety. I don't know if anyone else does that. My program does that. That's what Upward Dogology does. It's an actual methodology. So I think lots of them naturally reach that cognitive side of the brain. And it's interesting, there was a woman I was talking to, and she's done studies. And if puppies have had canine cognition or enrichment, I should say enrichment or games as puppies,
Mhm.
they're more likely to stimulate that cognitive side of the brain during puppyhood, and then that carries over to doghood. And I also see that in street dogs. So I've studied a lot of street dogs. I've worked with dogs from a lot of different backgrounds and upbringings, and I've gone to different countries and studied these street dogs. And I find that the ones that have lived on their own on the street or cared for themselves, they're using their cognitive skills to survive.
They're
They're
more
not,
wily, so yeah, that's how they get fed, and so they become smarter, more
right. So when we
clever.
bring them into our home
Yeah.
and we integrate them into our lives, we need to harness those skills, or else they just think like, what? It just tends to work better because we're harnessing what they've already been using.
Yeah. So and because they're clever, if they can take advantage of you. So this is where you are able to kind of do a little jujitsu.
Yes. So they're using their cognitive skills 100% of the time.
Mhm.
Might be 50, 80, 90% of their cognitive skills we like. We like what they're doing and it's working in our favor.
Right.
10%, 20, 30, it depends, might be what we don't like. But
Mm.
we have to work and harness those cognitive skills all the time in order to effectively work with them and effectively change the behaviors by changing perception. We have to change the behaviors we don't like. We can't only focus on those. We have to harness those skills all the time. So people tend to separate good behavior and bad behavior, which conditioning methods you can do. Conditioning methods, you have your good behavior, your unwanted behavior. Cognitive behavioral therapy, you
It's
are,
just behavior.
yeah, it makes it, the dog can do no wrong. There's no negative reaction. There's nothing aversive because the dog is doing what the dog feels they need to
Mhm.
do to achieve their goal.
And that has to be a big shift for people.
It's
The dog can do no wrong. When you come home in the kitchen, there's garbage all over the kitchen. You, through CBT, are getting people to see that it just is.
right. In a way, it doesn't mean that we can accept the behavior. It means that the reason they're doing the behavior is how we approach working with it. So, like I said, if the reason is because they don't know right from wrong, use your conditioning
Right.
methods.
But if
If
they
the
do know it's bad or you don't like it, that's where you would deploy CBT.
or if they know it keeps them alive. So, for example, a street dog knows that they lunge and bark at another dog. They
Yeah.
know that dog will run away, and they will be able to keep the the food that they've found on the street, for example.
Right.
So the behavior, um, when they get adopted into a home of lunging and barking at dogs on the street, is because it's a learned behavior and they know it works in their favor. So we can't
Mhm.
tell them it's wrong. We can't tell them, we can't use conditioning methods. Now, sometimes we can, sometimes conditioning methods will work. It depends on whether the dog wants to learn right from wrong. But if a dog has decided, no, that behavior is what I've learned works for me, we have to change their perception of needing to do that behavior in order to achieve their goal. And that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes
So let's talk a little bit about your podcast.
in.
You have divided it into seasons. How many seasons do you have?
I think 5.
5. And how many episodes are in a season?
Oh, it varies, but I think there's 46 episodes in total.
In total, divided by 5. So, okay. And there's sort of an evolution. So this is not a podcast designed for a listener to just listen to the latest one. You kind of appreciate when someone goes through the process. Is that right?
Hmm. Yes, it depends on what they're interested in, but the first one is my learning journey, and for some reason that's incredibly popular. Same with my book. The first chapter is what I've done and how I've learned what I know, and just that whole journey. And I didn't even actually have that in there when I first launched the podcast. I didn't think anyone would care, so I
No.
sort of put little tidbits of myself in randomly, and
Mhm.
that didn't go over well. So I did a you listen to your feedback, right? So I did a whole entire episode thinking, well, that gives people the option to not listen to it if they don't care.
Right.
And then season 1 continues on with talking about the difference between conditioning methods, and then gets into CBT. Season 2, I talk about some clients, the names have changed, but just what they experienced, what they tried, what worked, what didn't, how they got their dog. And that season is mostly so people cannot feel as though it's their fault or that they're different than anyone else. It's like, no, this is common. This behavior is common. And it's common to struggle or to be challenged with this. And it's common for conventional techniques to not be effective. And again, it's not a step-by-step what to do when your dog does this behavior, but it allows people to understand why and right, that is what my dog did. And that makes sense now. And so
Mhm.
they're starting to understand why what they were doing wasn't working, and it wasn't their trainer's fault and it wasn't their fault. It's just the method wasn't
Okay.
wasn't the right one. Then the
And the
next season is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and tell me about the other seasons because we're kind of running tight on
Oh,
time.
sure. Sorry. The next season is interviews with people that really help dogs. So a lot of rescues and pilots to the rescues, uh, people that transport dogs, people that help dogs. I love interviews are fun. Then the next season gets into some cognitive studies, and I'm really loving those because they really help to explain how dogs think cognitively and how that fits into people's real life and what dogs do and dog
Mhm.
behavior. And so that's really fun.
And that's the final. That's the season you're in right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mixed bag.
What is the future for your podcast?
If people have feedback on it or they would like to hear other things, I don't think it's a venue for teaching upward dogology for people who actually want to use learn the entire formula. For
Mhm.
people that have their own dog, they just hire me. But to learn the entire formula, I'm reaching out more to industry professionals, people that, behavioral veterinarians or animal scientists, people that have an interest in taking what they know and applying it to be able to help people. Because right now, dogs are being euthanized for behavioral reasons and being surrendered at an unacceptable and unnecessary rate. So, my goal is to have it become part of mainstream dog training so that we can better help these dogs by combining non aversive techniques and giving dogs the option. So I'm looking to collaborate with people that can help spread that and want to learn it. They truly want to learn it.
Well, if folks want to get in touch with you, what is the best way, Billy?
Well, my website is upwarddogology.com, www.upwarddogology.com. And Instagram is Upward Dogology. Email is billy@upwarddogology.com. I'm on LinkedIn as Billie Groom. Twitter and Facebook, Upward Dogology. I'm sort of everywhere. It's
You're
not hard
everywhere,
to find.
but I think visiting your website's a good way. And
Best
the name
way.
of the podcast, where you can find it in your favorite podcast player, is
Dog Training Disrupted by Upward Dogology.
awesome.
And I really appreciate everyone's support. I really am doing this solely because I help people every day in animals, and I absolutely love it, and it's rewarding. And I appreciate the support as well as yours, James. And I love your podcast.
Billie Groom, thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for tuning in today live or watching the recording of Dog Lovers Live. This is a program designed to help you discover other podcasts and other YouTube channels that may be of interest if you love dogs as much as we do here. So if you know of a podcast or a YouTube channel that we should introduce to our audience, let us know, and you can get in touch with us on our main website at dogpodcastnetwork.com. I'm James Jacobson, and on behalf of everyone here at DPN, thank you for watching, and we wish you and your dog a very warm aloha. Bye-bye.